Welcome to the Web Design Business Podcast with your host, Josh Hall, helping you build a web design business that gives you freedom and a lifestyle you love.
All right, friends, buckle up for this one. In this episode 228, I'm thrilled to bring back a fan favorite of this podcast, one of my very close friends for many reasons, apart from him being local to me, but he's also just one of my absolute favorite minds in the online entrepreneurial game. This is Jay Clouse, who I wanted to bring back on the podcast this time to share some lessons learned and what he's experienced in bringing his online business in the creator economy to over $250,000 this year in 2022. I am so proud of what I've seen that Jay has done with his podcast, his now YouTube channel, his online marketing strategy, his newsletter, his connection and community first mentality, his memberships, his courses, all things that did not start overnight and all at once, but things that he's built over the last 5 years to get to this point to have a stable $250,000 business that is only continuing to grow. I've seen what he's done over the past couple of years, and I asked Jay if he would be willing to just share with you what he's learned. So that's exactly what we do in this episode. Everything from his offerings, pricing, and money mindset, all the way to what he's learned about podcasting and ads and adding video and YouTube into the mix. And more importantly, what I find really fascinating, how the heck he's managing all of this stuff. I couldn't be more excited for you to hear from Jay. So on that note, let's not waste any more time. Here's Jay, and I'm so excited for you to hear. It's kind of a behind the scenes, like peek behind the curtain, just casual chat about what he's done to hit $250,000 in his online business. So way to go, Jay. And I hope you really enjoy this one just like I did. So let's dive in. Jay, welcome back onto the podcast. Round 3 with you, man. How are things?
Whoa, round 3. How many round 3s do you have?
You're up. There's only a couple other round 3s. So yes, I mean, it's a true honor, I would imagine, on your side.
It truly is. Yeah, I'm doing great. It's my kind of weather. I think I'm built for Arctic climates, but fall climates are pretty good. So I'm excited for fall in Ohio.
Yes, we're both in Columbus, and the fall is here at the time of recording this. Like, we did not have a smooth transition from summer to fall. In fact, like 5 days ago, it was like 90 degrees, and now it's like 50. So I saw a meme that said Ohio, the weather is like it just saw a state trooper and went from 90 to 55. So I felt like that articulated it.
That's amazing.
So that's the physical world, but the online world, Jay, man, the reason I wanted to have you on is number one, because you're just one of my favorite creators and online entrepreneurs. But number two, I'm sorry, I held it up odd. Usually people do 1, number 2 like that. For anyone watching, number 2, you have had an incredible year in your business, and it's been really cool as just a friend and colleague of yours to see where your business was about a year ago heading into 2022 and what you've done now. You've kind of tweaked some things, rebranded some things. You have an incredible podcast called the Creative Elements Podcast, which if anyone has not subscribed to, I highly recommend. But you've done some really cool things in the ways of memberships, courses, and just your online teaching style. So I just wanted to pick your brain to hear about some lessons learned, if that sounds good, man.
Yeah, for sure. It's been a wild year. I feel very fortunate. It still doesn't feel like real, a lot of it. So a lot of it is me being like, can I trust data? How much data do I need for it to feel like real? So yeah, well, happy to talk about any of that. But yeah, I feel like it's been a good year for me.
Well, the data in the form of numbers in the bank account, that's where I found it truly matters. And you've been really open and transparent about some of your profits and everything. I want to ask about that, particularly from a sense of like how transparency helps. But I have to ask you, Jay, like I've been asking a lot of guests recently, when somebody asks you what you do, what do you tell them now? Because you do a lot of things like a lot of other folks listening and a lot of folks in the entrepreneur world. What do you say?
It depends on whether this person, I believe, has any sense of what a creator is or not. If I feel like they don't quite understand, but kind of get it, I'll just say I'm a content creator. And they'll be like, so what does that mean? I'll be like, well, I write and have a podcast. For people who are a little bit more in the know and kind of understand the world we swim in, I say that I help creators earn a living. And more, I'm starting to think of it in terms of helping creators earn a living that is platform resilient. Because, we see all these news headlines about YouTube changing their monetization policies and even Twitch changing their monetization policies. And in the creator economy, like everybody gets all stirred up. But for me and the people that I work with, the creators that are clients of mine, it doesn't really affect us because most of our business models are resilient to platforms and algorithms. Not to say that we don't make money from platforms like that, but it's not what we are depending on for our business to operate and for us to really do well.
So it's funny you mentioned that because I just re-listened to the interview that I did on your show, Creative Elements, just to, it's been a while since I heard that. And
people love it, by the way.
Oh, that's so awesome to hear. I mean, I just like you, I'm happy to share everything that I've learned because it's such an incredible world, the online world, that's riddled with challenges and struggles, by the way. But that's why we're here to hopefully help some people navigate this. But what was interesting is I had talked about being a Divi specific web designer and how basically building a brand off of a platform really helped me. But I've even so more recently realized the power of and the importance of being platform agnostic to where if a platform goes by the wayside or gets bought or gets compromised in some way, it's not going to kill your business. So what a great lesson to start off with here. Like, I think the importance of diversification with different platforms and methods of marketing is so important. Great segue to one of the first things I was curious about, Jay. What is your experience with like diversifying your stuff between you're using a WordPress website, you're using Circle like I am for membership and community, you're getting on YouTube now, you're heavy on Instagram, your podcast is big. What are your thoughts and what are the lessons learned with diversifying all these different channels?
To be honest, I think I went about things kind of backwards, especially for what I would recommend most people today. Most people, like, it's a competitive marketplace. So to try to do a bunch of things at once is a recipe for having a hard time. I'm not going to say it's a recipe for disaster or for failing, but like it's going to be harder than if you said, you know what, I want to master Twitter and just do that for 2 years and have like a very specific lens that I put on the world and tweet about that and build an audience there and really get a bunch of writing together. And then I can branch out. That's a good way of going about it, in my opinion, if you're trying to grow quickly and build a substantial audience. For me, I was poor. And I was like, I need to make money immediately. I can't do the delayed gratification angle right away. So what I did was I kind of diversified out of the gate because I was just trying to claw a little bit of money here and there to just make sure that I could cover my expenses. And in the beginning, it looked a lot like services. It was pretty hand-to-hand combat. I had an email list, but more so than people just clicking a buy link in my emails and purchasing something, they would hit reply and say, I'm kind of interested. Can we have a call? Because I would offer like, let's have a call and talk about this. And then I would sell them some $500 to $1,000 program as a product. Then, the email audience continued to grow. Social media continued to grow. I had kind of a moment on Twitter last year where I put out a thread. It was like, hey, it's my 30th birthday. Here are 30 lessons in 30 years. And it went crazy. And I was like, oh, wow, that can actually like happen here on Twitter. And my following kind of doubled like overnight there. I broke 10,000 followers on Twitter. And I decided, okay, I could probably take this a little bit more seriously. Along the way, I had opportunities to make courses for LinkedIn Learning. And then I decided, well, I could probably make my own courses. So I started just like dabbling in things where I realized, okay, there are opportunities here to make small amounts of money in short periods of time. And I diversified myself by accident, to be honest. And so now, fast forward 5 years, and I've figured out, okay, I know how to make and sell digital products. I know how to build an email list. I know how to be active on social media. I even know how to sell things over social media now, which is actually pretty hard. I know how to do sponsorship in my newsletter. I know how to put sponsorship in my podcast. That's another project I built. And all of these properties, all the infrastructure is built. So now as the overall audience builds, there's just higher reach, which means more ad dollars. It means the same conversion rate equals more sales of products. So long way of saying I diversified accidentally, turned out to be really good, but it was a longer time horizon than it needs to be.
It's funny you mentioned that. So timely. I was just having a chat with somebody in my membership, my web design club, who is at a place where they kind of need some stronger cash flow quick. And he's got a couple different models that are subscription based, but it's low cost. So it's like $50, $99. That model, while very nice when it comes to cash flow and sustainability at scale, takes a while to get there. Like I don't know too many people who go $99 a month or $50 a month and can generate six figures relatively quickly, unless you have a framework that is already built and an audience and a big email list, etc. So I think it's a really important note. Like looking back at the 5-year journey so far, Jay, do you regret that in any way? Or do you feel like it actually worked out to do some of that, like you said, one-on-one, high touch, probably high time intensive, but $500,000 type deals? Do you regret that? Or do you feel like that was a pretty smart way to go looking back?
Yeah. I mean, in the beginning, like the best way to earn a living is to sell services, and you have to just do some basic math. Like my price point for that program came out of the basic math of saying, okay, this program is 3 months long. I think I can get 15-ish people in the program. So at 15 people, what price point do I need that's going to cover 3 months of expenses? Like that was just the math. And you can do that with any type of service, but I think that was the way to go for sure. Should I have started on YouTube as opposed to doing an audio only podcast when I didn't have much of an audience? Probably. That's something that I've realized is a trade-off I probably should have done. Should I have invested more time and effort into Twitter when I realized how the game was played and how to make the most out of it before everybody was doing threads? Yeah, I should have done that. I should have deprioritized email for a little bit, focused on Twitter, especially before I was selling advertising in my newsletter. Because a decision that I've made over this past year is to monetize my newsletter and my podcast and soon probably the YouTube channel with advertising. And when you add advertising into a product, you remove the optionality to just not do that for a period of time because you've sold inventory over a certain period of time. And if you don't deliver on that, then you're in breach of contract. So before I had contracts that I could have breached in the newsletter, I should have just stopped writing as much on email and done more on Twitter and maybe LinkedIn. So there were things that I would do differently, but starting with services, I would not change that. I think that was absolutely necessary.
That's sound advice. I appreciate hearing that because that's exactly what I told my student in this case. I was like, you got to look at what is your highest profitable service and what's your moneymaker? What's the value? And you had a really interesting point there, Jay. You looked at what you needed within a 3-month period. And it's so easy to do, but it's also easy not to do. Like the amount of times people ask me, what do I charge? I always go back to that. What do you want to make in a year, ideally? But let's break down from that. Like, yeah, I love looking at things in quarters because 3 months is like you can launch something, you can usually evaluate it, and you can usually get a good feel if you're going to be able to scale it and double it moving forward. So yeah, look at 3 months. What do you want to make in 3 months? If you need to make, I don't know, $15,000 to cover all your expenses and stuff, then guess what that is per month? You need to take home $5,000 a month. And I'm making this easy on myself because I always get myself in live
public
math, public math. Why do I do this to myself? But that's it. So, okay, $5,000 a month. How many web design projects do you need to get at your price point? If you charge $2,500, boom. 2 a month, that'll get you there. It's that easy to do. It's that quick to do. And then you can implement it from there. So I want to say that because I find so many people make things too complicated and overthink, just like I'm sure you and I have done many times and probably struggle with. Simplify it, make it simple, figure out what you need and go from there. Because have you found, like, for example, if you need $5,000 a month, but you launch a $50 a month subscription, that's a whole different ball game than offering a service that's $2,500, right?
Totally. I mean, pricing is such a trip. You and I talked about pricing, I think, twice already on this podcast, but let me just throw one thing out about pricing. The program that I was selling at the beginning of my business, it was a mastermind program. It was a 12-week mastermind. You come in, I surround you with other people like you, and we meet once a week for 12 weeks, and that's going to help you grow your business. I sold that product at the beginning for $400 for 12 weeks. There are people who sell that exact same product to a different customer and charge $10,000. Same product, same experience, different customer. And now today, I'm able to sell a membership that's $1,500 And I do that solely via email without having a one-on-one conversation at all. Whereas sometimes I would have to meet in person at a coffee shop with somebody to convince them to pay me $400 for 12 weeks. Pricing is all about, can you get this person to want the thing you are selling? And if so, price is inconsequential. If they really want that thing and that's the obvious solution to their problem and you are the person that they want to work with, pricing is so secondary. It can be anything. So we get a lot of hangups on pricing. But as you're just saying about like math, everything is a math problem. Everything is a numbers game. If you figure out what the top number needs to be, you can work backwards. And if you think, well, that seems like a higher price that I'm charging, you need to work on your story. You need to work on, yes, of course, there needs to be alignment of the value to this thing that you're selling. But so much of pricing is customer selection. There's this great Andy Warhol docuseries on Netflix right now. And they took his written diaries and used AI to construct a voice of him reading his written diaries in a lot of these places. And you hear Andy Warhol say in his diary, the secret to making a living as an artist is to find someone rich, get your work in their house, and let them sell for you. And I was like, yeah, really is that simple in a way. It can be that simple. It's client selection.
How have you found sales? How does it differ now? The way you're selling through, I mean, like I said, you're not doing one-on-one calls to sell. You're doing it by authority building, content. You've surrounded yourself with an incredible network, that kind of thing. Like, how have you found the way you sell now to be different than how you did 5 years ago, which is a lot of my web design students are doing and building their businesses? It's like one-on-one networking, boots on the ground type sales, but they can sell online. It just takes a whole different set of skills and challenges, doesn't it?
Well, I still only aspire to work with a relatively small number of people for most of my products that involve my time whatsoever. So my biggest product right now is a membership community, not dissimilar to your membership community. It's an annual commitment, and I only have availability for 200 people to join that membership. I capped it at 200 because I just don't think I can provide the same level of service that I want to provide and am currently providing beyond 200 people. Maybe I figure some things out and that expands someday. Probably not. So for me, I don't need to. My audience is big enough that I don't have to be super pushy. Like, I can have a pretty high number of leads relatively easily because of just the number of people I reach on a weekly basis. So every lead conversation I have is so much lower stakes because I don't need this one person to convert to a sale. There are a bunch of people that might convert, and I know that some of them will. Now, it's a privileged position to be in now. But the takeaway that I want to give to people who are just starting out is, if you, like, the more you are thirsty for the sale, it's felt, it's understood. It's hard to mask that, where it feels like you're coming from a place of scarcity and your stakes are really high. That's a lot of pressure on the customer, and somehow they just sense it. And so now
it's true. They can sense it from a mile away.
I'm not like super far on the woo-woo end of the spectrum, but there's something there. And so I just don't put a lot of pressure on sales on anything. Literally any sales email that I send, and I do send dedicated sales email, I'll end every one of those emails with no pressure, no expectation. If this is for you, I hope you join us. And since I don't necessarily need any of these things to directly convert to a sale to provide for my livelihood, because the portfolio of products and services I offer cover my needs just fine, I think it's inviting to people because they feel the calmness that I have, and they aspire to that. And that's what I'm promising to provide. So it's hard to just put on like a jacket of confidence, but that's kind of my advice.
Yeah. I don't know how quote unquote desperate you were in the first couple of years of this, but when do you feel like the paradigm shifted for you to where you went from like maybe a little salesy, a little hustling to like, I have a decent sized audience now, I don't have to come across like that? When did that switch for you?
It probably took at least 3, maybe 4 years. Like the big year. And I mean, this is so weird because in the middle of this 5-year journey was COVID. So when COVID hit, and there was a lot of uncertainty, I just started taking on any project that was coming in my door because I'm like, let me make hay while the sun is shining. I don't know what's going to happen. and I worked really hard, and I was able to put away a fair amount of like client service money that I was earning in case of emergency. And so I realized like, oh, if I just push harder, I could actually, my capacity is higher than I thought, and I can pull these things in. But it removed some level of pressure from me. And then one of those projects was the consulting project with Matt and Pat at SPI. And that led to part of my business being acquired by SPI and the opportunity to go lead community at SPI. And so when I did that, I got, the buyout of the business. I got a salary from SPI, and I still had like my content business that I was able to grow on my own, growing an audience, selling digital products. So in that year, I had no financial pressure on the business whatsoever, because not only was it still earning almost as much as the previous year on its own, pretty much on autopilot without services, I had a salary, and like I was good. So all the decisions I could make for my business for a year had no real financial implications. And that's when I realized like, wow, when I don't put financial pressure on the business, I make better decisions for it. And people want to work with me even more. And it's counterintuitive, and it's frustrating to hear. But when you don't need clients, more clients want to work with you. It's just the way it is.
It's like dating too, isn't it? Like when you're just so desperate for a relationship, they're going to sense that. Whereas if you're like, hey, I'd like to go out, but if it's no big deal, then they're like, oh, wow, I like this person.
And you hear this advice in negotiation all the time too. Yeah. They're like the highest leverage part of negotiation, or the highest leverage point, is when you're willing to walk away. And so for any clients that kind of knocked on my door, because I didn't do any outbound because I didn't have time for it really. Anyone who came to my door and said, hey, can I hire you? I would start from a place of, again, this pricing question. What would make this worthwhile to me to do it? And I usually erred on the side of being high. And a lot of them said no. A few of them said yes. But anyone who said no and tried to negotiate, I just said no. It's not worth it. I don't have time. And this is what the price is, similar to going into any type of shop that just sells a widget of some sort. And they say, this is the price. You don't go to Walmart and try to haggle the price of a light bulb. That's the price. And for me, for a year, there's the same with my client services that I offered. And I was like, this is the price, and you can pay it or you can not. And there's no hard feelings. It's not personal. It's okay. I just don't need it. And if you're not going to pay the price, then it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Now, I feel like that's not, I don't want to say easy, but like it's very practical to be able to do that in person or at small scale. But at larger scale, particularly online, like social media, for example, you mentioned earlier, something you said I want to swing back around to, was that you learn how to sell via social media. If you would, Jay, enlighten me and enlighten everyone listening. What have you learned with selling on social?
I don't have perfect data for this, but anecdotally, I would say that I have earned as much from Twitter this year as I have from my email list, which is crazy and frustrating and also exciting. But it really just comes from a place of, one, I think the audience I've curated on Twitter are people who value investing in products and services and improving themselves. I think that's like a true thing about Twitter's audience. And I think they also are generally, at least my audience, more affluent than people who are on Instagram, maybe YouTube. So for me, when I have something that I want to sell, I will test out the idea of what the solution is as a tweet or a thread without a link, just to say, like, here's a great example. About a month ago, I made somewhere in the ballpark of, I think, $7,000 on this productized service that I called Brutally Honest Audits. And it came from like a conversation I was having inside my membership where I just told them like, hey, listen, you're paying for me to help you improve your business. I'm going to be increasingly brutally honest with my feedback, because it doesn't serve you for me to sugarcoat it or pull punches. You need to know what is holding you back. And I think a lot of people are in that space where they don't ask for feedback. When they do ask for feedback, they ask for feedback from people who are close to them, so they don't get the full story. And so I just put it on Twitter. I'm like, I think I'm going to offer a product called Brutally Honest Audits, where I spend an hour looking at your website, your products, your social media, and give you the honest truth of what is probably holding you back. What do you think? And I had a bunch of people reply to that, and it created this public momentum of this thing saying, take my money, I would buy that. So I put up a really basic sales page on ConvertKit Commerce, and I said, here it is. If you're serious, like, go ahead and buy it. and 14 people bought that thing with like 2 paragraphs of text. Like it had almost no context other than the tweet and other people publicly saying, I'm going to buy this. And some of those people publicly saying, I'm going to buy this were legitimate known people. So I think it de-risked the purchase for other people who were a little bit more on the fence. And that's something that you don't see in email. Like I could have those same legitimate known people on my email list buying the same products, but that purchase is not seen by other people until I wrap that into a testimonial or a case study or something to put on the website. And then they're still like, but is this true? Unless like they can see that person saying it. So on social media, you can see this came from this person's actual account, that they did this action, they bought this thing. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. And that's been true of that audit product I did. That's been true of $40 workshops that I've put together and sold, or courses, or even the membership. A lot of people have joined the membership based on Twitter.
It's a really good point too. Oh gosh, so much I'd love to unpack there. But one thing that's really interesting is the social proof on social media versus a standard like testimonial that someone is going to overthink and often like fumble a bunch of words and like fluff it up. Like that's the danger of asking for testimonials, is sometimes somebody's going to spend, an hour on it, and it's just going to become something where it's just real quick, just tell me your thoughts. Tell me where you were and how it helped. On social media, you do get to see that. I've never really thought about that before, but I've experienced that both with my business now as a creator and a coach and an online service provider, but also as a web designer for years. Is if I would have engaged with my clients a little more on socials, they probably would have fed into that like public review type thing, as opposed to like a testimonial on my website that, it's real, it's authentic, but there is something about people being like, oh, I just purchased it, was awesome. Like I totally recommend it. Or this has helped me out in just a couple months. This is one thing that I've really taken away from what you've done on socials. Is one thing that I'm just completely looking at to apply to my own business is, how is Jay showcasing reviews, particularly from Twitter, it looks like, from people just saying, oh my gosh, the creator, what is it called now? Is it the creative lab, or it's creator side? The lab. Like the lab has changed my life. It's the best people online, but it's real, it's quick, it's bite size. Yeah. That is so powerful. And it's over and over and over again with different people, all on social media.
And when you're seeing it happen in real time, because you're on Twitter and you saw this tweet and now you're seeing that replies are being added to it, Jay's engaging with it, people are buying it. It feels like a party. It feels like something that you want to join. It feels timely. It feels exciting. You don't get that same experience reading a sales page, no matter how much there is in the way of testimonials. Like you want to know who's doing this thing right now, because I want to make the same decisions as these people. I want to be like, I see myself and these other people who are doing this. I identify with them. I, in some cases, aspire to be like them. And if they're making this decision, I want to do that too. And they're doing it in real time. We're seeing now a lot of cohort-based courses, these like live programs and experiences people are running. That amplifies this even more, because it's not just, oh, this person bought it. It's this person bought it and they just enrolled in a program for X number of weeks, where I can be in that same Zoom call with that person that I may also be following on Twitter or Instagram or whatever else. And I can actually interact with that person because I can see they joined this thing. You can really build some public momentum on social media that way. The challenge is any social media platform doesn't want you to post a link to anything. So you kind of have to start in ways that don't depend on the link. Like when I put out that idea about the audit, one, I didn't even have a link. I didn't even make the thing yet. I was like, here's the idea. What do you think? I invited people to weigh in on it. That tweet started performing well because Twitter saw, okay, there are replies here, there are likes on this. And by the time it was already rolling and had momentum, then I could put on a link as a second tweet or reply to people. And that's not hurting the performance of that tweet as much because it already has some momentum.
That's a good point, because social media by nature, any platform, regardless of what you think about it, they want the eyes and the attention on that post or whatever it is as much as possible. So for your Twitter thread right there, it's like that was the end of the funnel. Like you just wanted people to share their thoughts, which is really interesting. It's like kind of a cool thought experiment for everyone. Instead of just sending somebody off somewhere, what if you could create something that sends them there? Yeah. I'm definitely going to apply that to something I'll do here soon to try that out. That makes a whole lot of sense. And then it sounds like commenting with a link, or like I said, second post. But I would imagine commenting would probably be the best approach in that case, right? It's like, okay, you're interested, here's the link.
For that audit, that's what I did, because a lot of people said, I would buy this. So I said, okay, prove it.
Yeah.
Basically,
Yeah.
if it was something like, I had another tweet, I started pre-selling this course on building a membership because the lab has done so well. I'm making a course on building a membership. And so the first tweet was, wow, pre-sales of my new course are on fire today. And then I just had an image of the course logo, didn't have a link in it. That started performing pretty well. And then sometime a couple hours later, I said, here's where you can enroll with pre-sale pricing. And I appended it to it. So when you see it in your feed, it looks like a tiny little thread, same with on my profile. But I was able to give it some room to breathe and move before appending a link onto that tweet.
I love this idea of sharing quick wins and sharing results from a community perspective. I don't want to say it's easier to do. You've by all means, Jay, earned where you're at and earned your audience with every blood, sweat, and fingertip on a keyboard. But I've seen the same thing happen in my networking group. I've shared with you, when I grew my web design business to 6 figures, it was largely because of my networking group. That was a small group of 20 to 30 people, but it became like this physical community that expanded. And then, of course, I was their go-to web designer for all their network. So I saw the same thing. I never thought about it like that. But when I would get a result for one person, they would tell somebody else, or they would just see it. They're like, wow, Josh worked with his real estate gal and her website looks awesome. I want that too. And then when I would work with their friends and colleagues, they would see that. But there is this like other aspect of clients that I experienced where they weren't going to be connected with other clients. There was no sense of community whatsoever. There was like my networking group. There's the online community like you and I are building right now. But then there's these people in the middle, the one-offs, the people who are never probably going to be connected with other clients or an online community. What's your tips and what have you learned about selling to them? When there is no sense of like, maybe they'll follow on social media, but I don't know if they're going to, maybe they don't even have the time. Maybe they just got referred to me and it's going to be a fairly quick interaction. What have you learned to help kind of bring in those people?
Well, I mean, it's fundamentally not a different selling process. It's, you want to build your process and your assets to be able to sell somebody, whether there was any real-time social proof or not. Like you want to prepare your sales pipeline to fit the one-offs. Because if it fits the one-offs, it'll fit everybody else, because like if you just layer on top of that social proof and recommendations from people, it's going to do really well. So to me, it doesn't really make a whole lot of difference. One thing I have been thinking about a lot more lately that's kind of related to this is there are just kind of like what you're saying. There are different buyer personas within your audience as you scale. Like right now, there are a lot of people who are talking about, hey, your online courses should live on a community platform like Circle, because there, not only will they learn from you, but they have the benefit of hearing other people's questions, learning from other people in that community. And there will be certainly people who want that. And that will be a good model for a lot of people to add into their world. But for me, what I've noticed is there are a lot of creators who are cluing in to what I'm doing, who don't necessarily want to be known that they're cluing into what I'm doing. They want to like remain private.
Holding my hand up. Yeah.
They want to remain kind of private and anonymous because one, they're creators themselves that are a certain level of scale, which means if you put them in front of other people, in a worst case scenario, people change their perception of that person because they're holding them up and they're saying, well, if you're following Jay, maybe I should be following Jay. On the other side of the spectrum, they just don't want to open themselves up to more inbound from other people. So like these people don't necessarily want to join a cohort-based course because not only will they have the pressure of learning this thing in this room, but they feel like they have to be on and perform for the other people that are here because they have a certain public persona. So for those people, I want to continue to give them ways to interact with and learn from me that are kind of gated and private and shielded. And so as I'm looking at like the Circle Courses product, for example, I'm looking to see, will that provide privacy and anonymity
Anonymity.
To people? There it is. To people who don't want to be known.
I liked anonymous more. We're going to roll with that though. Sorry.
Anonymousness and anonymity for people who don't want to be known to be purchasing this thing or buying this thing. Yeah. So I'm thinking more and more about like my overall product set. And yes, I want a clear product pipeline for the general audience member that I attract. But then I also realize there are opportunities to serve a more someone who's further along in their journey that doesn't necessarily want to be thrust into a community or communal experience.
Yeah. It's so reminiscent of why I learned the power of tiers, particularly in web design, because there were clients who were very high touch, who maybe actually were interested in talking with other clients of ours to see what was working and see what they learned. But then there's the clients who they're busy. They just want their website, and yeah, they want to stay in touch, but it's not going to be nearly as high touch. And having an offer for everyone really, really helped me out. And it made me feel like I didn't have to custom quote one by one. It was like, here's the 3 offers. Let's look at what bucket you're in, and let's make sure we have the best option for you. What have you learned with that now? Because you do, I mean, your courses, are they one-off still, Jay, or are your courses wrapped up in any sort of like program?
They are one-off, but a decision I just made recently was if you join the lab, you get full access to courses and workshops, because
Nice.
that's a $1,500 investment minimum. It's a year long, and the courses are between $40 for a workshop, $200 for my podcasting course, $400 for my memberships course. So to me, like, I'm happy to price that in and have the lab be this place where it's like, if you're really committed to supporting me and leveling up over the course of a year, I'm going to give you all the resources that I can to succeed in there. But there are people who are going to want to buy courses just one off.
Yeah, the reason I asked that was with your type of suite of products and options, it's like I was kind of curious about what your tiers were. If somebody wants to go one off, or if there's like a middle range, and then of course I imagine the ideal customer for you would go into your membership. And I mean, your ad kind of stuff, that's at scale, but that's a totally different type of ball game and I'm curious about that as well. But yeah, I was kind of curious about how that works for you. And actually, a quick question. Do you back up that idea of having like an offer for maybe not everybody, but for your ideal client, depending on where they are? Do you think it's really worthwhile having like a 3-tier kind of option, like maybe a high intensive approach, maybe a middle tier where most clients are going to be, and having even like a starter type option to get people through the door?
Yeah, totally. I absolutely do. I think there's a some threshold where you have too many things and too many choices, but as long as it's very clear and intuitive to people coming into your world what thing is right for them, then it's good to be able to serve multiple people. So I think in general, if you have like a service-based business, having some sort of do-it-yourself starting point templates that are extremely low touch for you is a smart idea. I think having some sort of tier where it's like that DIY plus some level of one-on-one support and like consultancy from you is good. And then I think having a full done for you service on top of that, those 3 tiers make a lot of sense for service providers. For courses, I even recommend a lot of the folks in the lab that are building courses now, have a couple tiers for your courses. Have the DIY, like self-paced course, and then have self-paced course plus an hour with you. Or some people I've talked to, they're playing around with this idea of self-paced course plus unlimited email communication questions on that course. And to me, that's a little scary because it opens you up to like
gave me
some
chills.
level of abuse. Yeah.
Yeah.
But some people do it, and they serve a client who understands that like trust you're putting in them to not over abuse it, but it's a little scary. So I don't recommend that as much, but some people do it.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That's well said. I'm kind of curious because I think a lot of people listening as web design business owners may be inspired by this and feel like, okay, there's a lot of good nuggets in here, but how does this apply as a service provider? And one thing that's a little bit different that I've learned in my journey from service provider to, I guess I'm a course creator, content creator, whatever you want to call me, is I am building an audience now. Now, it's very similar to when I was a web designer, but I never called my clients or network an audience. What would you call a service provider's pool of people? I don't know what to call that. Would you call that network?
I probably would still say audience. Like, I think it's,
really?
Yeah. And listen, I'm a little biased because my lens is for creators, because I've made that transition from freelancer to creator. And I think if you're going to use content creation as a lever to be basically your top of funnel for new clients, it's beneficial to think of yourself as a creator who provides services as opposed to a service provider who is a creator, because it's so much harder to succeed as a creator, in my opinion. And so I think if you want to go that route and make that successful, you need to identify with the harder thing of being a creator, get really good at that. Because if you do get that, if you do that well, clients are not going to be a problem because numbers are just going to be in your favor. It's going to be easier to convince people to work with you because you are like a known commodity in their life and they want to work with you specifically. So I think I'd probably still go with audience. That being said, like I wish there was a better term than audience that means audience that made the relationship feel less one way. You know, like some people will use the word community for their Instagram following, and I don't necessarily buy that because to me, community is a very peer-to-peer network of people. But I can understand the appeal to it because I think you do want to have a more communal vibe to what you're building alongside your audience. Whereas audience feels it almost feels like you're preying on them, which I don't love.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing. And I really thought about this, but back in like the heyday of my web design agency, when things were at multi six figures and I had my really strong networking group, which was much more the community aspect, I did have a YouTube channel. Yes. Even as just a web designer, I started my YouTube channel as In Transit Studios, and that was gaining people. So that was kind of like the audience part. But then again, there were these like referrals and people who were just in some sort of my network. And I didn't really know what to call them or where they fit in. But it does kind of make a lot of sense, even in both of our businesses now. We have the people who are like community, they're engaged, they're in it. We know them by name often, and we see the results. There's the people who are just the outliers who are just following along. Maybe they'll step into the world eventually. Maybe they're just gaining some stuff and going to peace out at some point. And then there's the people who are kind of in between all of that. So it's definitely what I've found as a service provider. And I think it's interesting because what you said earlier, where you start to build an audience and then suddenly it starts magnifying. It's the same thing as a web designer and as a service provider. Like if you go to a networking group, you don't have anybody who knows your business. Now you got 20 people who know. Yeah. They know 10 people a piece who might use you. Then you got 200 people. Then every time you go to a networking group, it expands. Every time you host a webinar or go to a workshop or meet somebody, it just starts to expand. And then I think your idea and experience of like the 3-year mark or so to where it really starts to become like you don't need every project. It's because all of these things compound, and you may not realize how many people you're making connections with and how far your name is spreading within about a year or two. I think that's common to both the service end of things and as an online content creator.
Totally. I started very similarly. Like my creator business began as being a host of large scale meetups here in Columbus. My network was built in person. And so when I started making things online, enough people I had met in person were connected to me on LinkedIn, friends with me on Facebook. So like it was an easy transition in that way, but it's very much a good way to kickstart your audience, we'll call it, by doing in-person networking events and meeting people, building real relationships with people. That's who's going to start following you on your creator journey if you go in that direction. But, overall, like I'm playing a big numbers game, but as you're saying, it is all just a number game of different levels of scale. If you want finding clients to be super easy, play at a bigger scale and do really good work and build out the ring of your concentric circles of your audience so that you have more people in the former client ring who are now advocates for you, sharing your business. I'm focused on like the outer ring of the audience where it's like, well, there's so many of these people. Some of these people are going to continue down the path and want to work with me. But honestly, I need that so little because of the other discrete assets, digital assets that I've created, that the service route is no longer even really interesting to me.
With the idea of social media in particular, do you feel like it is a necessity to have social media for even service providers now? Or what's your take on that? I have very conflicting feelings on social media.
I think of it as discovery platforms and owned platforms. So discovery platforms are platforms where people are going to find you and your work organically by virtue of traffic on that platform. So I'm talking about social media. I'm talking about YouTube. I'm talking about Google even, because there's organic traffic there. I think it is important to consider discovery platforms as part of your overall strategy. And if you're able to hang your hat on one of them and doing it really well, and again, some of them, that's just search on Google. For some, it's search on YouTube. For others, it's Instagram Reels right now. But I think it's useful to do that because discoverability in email or podcasting, it doesn't exist. It's all about referrals. So to me, once you build that infrastructure of having this owned ecosystem where you can communicate reliably with people who have opted in to hear from you, then you want to kind of turn the dial or open the valve a little bit more and start to leverage these discovery platforms. If you don't feel energized or interested in making content on any of those platforms or several of those platforms, then don't, because it's not going to work out. Like if you hate video and being on video, forcing yourself to do TikTok is not going to work out for anybody because it's not going to be good content. You have to be a student of that platform and do it for a long time to get good enough at it that it starts to break through. And if you don't like doing it, it's not a winning proposition. So stick to the things that are sustainable, that you would enjoy doing, you can do for a period of time. And that's where I would focus your energy.
That's well said. Something you mentioned earlier too is that you had maybe potentially would have done YouTube before going like the audio only podcast route. A lot of my students are considering doing podcasts, and some even have done podcasts. And I love podcasting. It's the number one thing for me right now, but it is very different in terms of discoverability. Whereas I built my audience, as you know, Jay, on YouTube, where YouTube did the work for me. All I did was make a nice tutorial, and YouTube becomes your like salesperson. Yeah. Podcasting is different. Podcasting, you need to do much more work and gain that following and earn that trust for people to come back. Now, it's super powerful, but it does tend to take much more work. So I think the lesson here that I'm picking up is that, especially early on, if you need some cash flow or if you're at a point in your business where you're scaling and you need to do the biggest money makers, you do need to look at what methods are going to be high reward, but they're going to take longer, like podcasting, like intentional stuff like that, like a membership, or more like discoverability, larger scale, where there's, maybe the return is a little bit different, but you're likely going to open that pool of audience, like we're talking about, a lot faster. I think it's a really important thing to consider when it comes to like how to market your business in the like online world, and also not neglecting meetups and networking groups and the face-to-face kind of things. So I think that's the big struggle. That's just what I have in my talks with a lot of my students. They want to know where to market and where the best option is. And it's a tough thing to say really quickly because it depends. And I hate answers that say it depends, but it really does. It's like, what are you good at? What are you interested in? What's your goal here? Like I grew my web design business with no social media at all. I used it later on just to showcase some work and stuff. But I think I'm living proof, and I think you're living proof that you can do it both ways. It just probably depends on like where your risk tolerance is and what your skill set is and where you're at in life. Like, you got to a point where, like you said, you needed to make money quick. So you had to focus on the higher end offers. Sounds like at some point.
Yeah. And Danny Miranda had a good take on this recently. We were on a panel together, and he said, if you're getting started and you're trying to think of what platform to spend time on, go to the one that you enjoy most as a consumer. And I like that take because the implication is you're more of a student of that platform. You probably have already built up better taste and intuition over what works on that platform, so you can get off to a stronger start. Now, I know plenty of people who love scrolling TikTok but hate being on videos. So that's tough. If you still hate the aspect of creation for this platform, it'll be tough. But start on something that you really love consuming, because you do need to learn it. Like if I'm honest about the platforms that I'm on, and if I rank and stack them by how much time I spend consuming on those platforms and how big my audience is on that platform, I think there's a very high correlation actually that my best, my most engaged, highest following platforms are the ones that I actively spend the most time on as a consumer. I don't think that's an accident.
Yeah. That's a good point. Well said, and a great lesson for folks who are figuring out where to spend their time, because that's just like the struggle we have now. Where do we spend our time when it comes to marketing and everything we do? I have to ask you, I'm really curious, Jay, from the sense of like ads. I know this isn't something everyone's going to dive into, but for folks who do pick up traction in a certain platform or whatever, what has your experience been with ads, sponsors? I don't want to derail us completely, but like, for service providers, I don't know if that's the first. That would probably be something that's going to be later on, but
it's definitely a game that favors scale, because at the highest levels and the sponsors that you hear on podcasts and YouTube and see an email list, most of them are deploying a paid acquisition strategy, a paid acquisition of attention, customers, subscribers, whatever, across a bunch of channels. They're putting a lot of money into this. And the game they are playing is a CPM game, cost per mila. It means cost per 1,000 impressions. So if your podcast gets 1,000 downloads per episode, that is 1 mila that you can sell. And a lot of these advertisers pay $20 to $40 per CPM. So even at 1,000 downloads per episode, in a CPM game, you're talking about $40 that you would get there. So you really need to have a level of scale to play that game. Now, you can still do direct sales and price differently. You would just have to work with different sponsors. And what I recommend to folks with smaller audiences who aren't at a level of scale where CPMs make sense is to work with service providers, because they need fewer conversions to a customer to pay off the investment in an ad. We had a podcast here locally that we ran for a while that was about startup founders, and all of our sponsors were law firms, accounting firms, staffing firms, because they could easily pay off their sponsorship with one customer. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times their customers weren't even just our listeners. They were guests that we had on the show. So we could just be a good advocate for that sponsor, even to the guests that we have on the show, and easily make that a return on investment that makes them want to renew. But it is high pressure. It removes optionality to not publish when you are selling advertising inventory in the thing that you're making.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm kind of curious on a personal level here, Jay. Like, did you start all of your channels? I mean, you have YouTube, podcast, website, membership, Instagram, Twitter. Did you start all of these things when you started your creator journey and just add to them and utilize them as time went on? Or did you from the beginning space yourself out and spread yourself out on all these platforms?
I started with email, and then I added podcasting because I was doing that startup podcast and I really liked the medium, but I wanted it to be related to my current business. YouTube has only been active since July of 2022, so a few months as of this recording. So I add commitments slowly, especially commitments that are like perpetual commitments, where it's like, I'm going to publish this every week for forever until I die, I guess. I try to add those things slowly because those are huge commitments. That's huge. That's a huge amount of time on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis that you're putting into things. So I space those out pretty well. And even once I had those rolling, like I haven't really put an advertising strategy onto YouTube yet, in part because I don't actually know how people price these things. It's a different model because you can't dynamically remove ads. Little inside baseball on podcasts, like my podcast, I have just empty spaces in the audio file so that my hosting platform can put in ads across every episode that's ever been published at the same time until it hits a certain number of impressions, and then it can replace it with a new ad. YouTube doesn't work that way. So I'm trying to figure out how you even price that effectively for something that will live on the channel in the file forever. And maybe your lowest viewed video, maybe your highest viewed video, you don't really know. Yeah. So I'm still trying to figure that out.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's interesting. And the reason I ask that is because when I look at people who are at a place where you're at now, you're doing a lot of different things. And I'm wondering personally, how are you staying sustainable Do you feel overwhelmed frequently with all these different moving parts? Or do you feel like because you've added slowly and you know how to manage time and manage commitments, which is the big thing. Like I shared with you on your show, the reason I started with a 3-month challenge for myself, 1 tutorial a week for 3 months, is because I did not want to put myself in a weekly content rat race, which really helped me. And I'm still applying those principles today. But for you, like, how have you stayed sane and sustainable through all these different things going on?
Well, look, I am a professional. Like, I treat this as a job. I show up every day. I work 8-ish hours every day. And if I didn't, would the business continue to run? To some degree, but not fully. Like, it does depend on me and my time. I could outsource and hire for a lot of that, but I can't hire a podcast host. That wouldn't work. I could maybe hire a writer for the newsletter, but I think it would be felt to some degree and change the product. I won't necessarily say make it worse, but it would change the product. So I just this weekend put together a list of all the repeatable tasks that I'm doing that I probably don't need to be doing. And there were 37 things on that list that basically on a weekly basis I'm doing that I shouldn't be doing, that I could hire for. So I am trying to get more in that direction, but I'm starting to think of my business more as a machine where I can input one of two things, time or money, and outcome results. So what I'm trying to do is limit my time input to get the maximum financial return that I can, so that I can use that financial return as a new input to the machine to hire people. And that's a tricky balance to strike, because I could just spend another hour on this today and then I wouldn't necessarily need to hire somebody to do it. But like, that really adds up over time. But it's also a risk to say, nope, I'm just going to hire this and create a relationship that you're paying for every week, every month to this person, that you need to make sure the business is still outputting enough revenue to pay that person. And even if I do have the revenue to pay that person, is that the most prudent cost? Should I actually just invest that into some of these known growth strategies so I can generate more ad revenue and have more money to hire a person? And when do I make that call? It's a complicated thing that I'm trying to work through at this point.
Yeah. I love that. It's it's so likened to what I went through and a lot of my students are going through now, when they get to a point where you realize I can't do everything in my business, or I'm literally going to work like 90 or 100-hour weeks. So I think the idea of having a list where, you write out repeatable tasks. I had Jenny Blake on the podcast recently, who's the author of a book called Free Time. Such a great read. I'm going through it right now. But her take was to have like a list of like flow tasks and flow work, and then friction work, and just feel like, what gives you energy? What brings you down? And maybe there are some repeated things, but you like doing them. Those, maybe keep them on for as long as you want. That was so beneficial for me to hear, because I actually started outsourcing, the podcast descriptions that I personally write for every podcast episode. I thought it's taken some time. I could outsource this and just have Cam, my VA, just write up a description or take it from my audio recorded intro. But we did that for like 3 weeks, and I was like, she did a fine job. It wasn't on her, but I was like, I kind of miss writing those. I like those because it's good for me to have a writing practice every week. And it also helps me like get to know the guests better and remember the episode and remember what we talked about and the takeaways. So I was like, for right now, even though it is technically something I could hand off, I'm going to do this because I enjoy it and it fills me up a little bit. So I just hope that's a good practical example for everyone listening who you're wanting to figure out what to delegate, what to get off your plate. But just remember those tasks that are good for you, that are going to fill you up and then going to bring you down. But either way, I think the most risky thing you can do in your business is to keep it all on your shoulders, because at some point something's going to break. It's going to lead to burnout. And as we all know, if something happens and you're laid up in the hospital for 3 months with broken hands or something, you could be really, really in danger. One of my students right now is actually, she just recently got diagnosed with breast cancer, and she's going through chemo. And luckily we had already started to scale her business up to the point. She's actually going to come onto the podcast once she's through this experience and kind of share what she's learned. But she told me, she's like, thank God we scaled a little bit because now it's not just me in my business. So anyway, I just think it's a really, really good note to hit on here, especially as we get ready to wrap this up, because it's so easy to fall in that trap where you create a super complex, time sucking job for yourself as a solopreneur or a content creator.
And a lot of that, usually I find when like it feels like a time sucking thing, it's also time sucking just to maintain what you've already built. It's not like it's time sucking and I'm making it better. It's like it's time sucking and I'm just treading water. And that sucks because it's not going to get better magically on its own. Like you need to continue improving upon this thing. Because again, to use like the machine analogy, if you're thinking about your business as a machine, you have to continue to invest in making a better machine, because if you don't, other people are going to be building better machines. And now they're going to create a better product than yours or a cheaper product than yours, using product loosely here, because your machine is out of date. You have to improve the machine over time too, or you become obsolete.
Yeah. Gosh, you got to, innovate the business itself, innovate your product offerings. That's sometimes I tell my students, like, you want to know the best conversion tip? Would you buy your own service? And if you really don't, feel like you would buy it over some other people, then you got work to do. Like that's where it all starts. It kind of goes back to like, and it's so easy to fall into this trap of like doing all the outbound marketing on little things, but like, where does this all lead to? Okay. It's this thing, this main service, website design, for example. Is your website design packages, are they the best that you can offer right now? Because that translates to everything. That translates to sales and all the things. So gosh, it's such an important point. I wish somebody would have told me that years ago for sure. Because I found myself doing like way more networking and way more outbound things. And I just kind of let my services themselves kind of slip. Like you mentioned, kind of got a little out of date.
Yeah.
So that's great.
Totally.
I have one final question for you, Jay. Before we get to that though, we talked about where you are all over the internet. Where would you like people to go after this? I think a lot of my audience probably knows you pretty well. You presented recently in my web design club on premium pricing mindset. We'll link your other episodes because you were on in 67. We talked about confidence in sales. We talked about freelancing for web designers. I really enjoyed this though, because I've been such a fan of what you've done over the past year. I kind of feel like I'm starting, like, even though I know you pretty well now, I'm like, I know Jay. I knew him before he was the Jay Clouse of now.
Stop. Oh my God.
But it has been impressive. And the reason I asked you about sustainability is I feel like I don't sense that you're like burning out and you're like, oh my God, I can't do. How long is Jay going to be able to keep this up? I feel like you have a good hold on it. Anyway, all that to say, where would you like people to go after this?
Yeah. Well, so as I said at the beginning, I help creators earn a living. My business is called Creator Science, trying to break down like the predictable, known, controllable things behind being a creator. So creatorscience.com is the best place to go to get on my mailing list, which I recommend that you do. It's where I'm sharing everything that I'm learning up to date. If you like podcasts, because you're listening to this, Creative Elements is my podcast.
There it is. And of course, we'll have those linked in the show notes. I'm kind of curious. Okay, two final questions actually for you. What is your favorite social platform?
Twitter.
Okay, so Twitter's your favorite. I guess I could have probably guessed that. What personally fills you up the most, Jay? Like day to day, week to week, what are the moments when you're running your business that just excite? Is it a client result? Is it one of your members who tells you how you're helping change their life? Is it your numbers going up? Is it your bank account being filled up? What are like the top moments for you week to week?
If I'm totally honest, I do get extreme satisfaction over seeing progress. And so progress can mean a lot of things, but for me and my business's health, like I have a pretty in-depth KPI dashboard and I want to see that numbers are trending upwards and green on that dashboard, right? All of those numbers. Because that means that I'm doing well and I'm improving the business. I'm not trying to like stay stagnant. So if I'm honest, it's progress in that way. But in a more abstract sense, I love doing what I do because so much of this feels like a big puzzle where like I'm looking at the cover of the box and it looks like Ryan Holiday or James Clear's life. It's like, that's what I'm shooting for. How do I solve this puzzle? Looking at, their lifestyle, what they've done, and the trajectory that I've already built and the business that I've built. How do I get to this outcome? So there are just feelings in the day-to-day, week to week when you feel the puzzle pieces click together. And like, that is the stuff. That's the best part. When I feel like the pieces click together and you're just like, yes, I didn't know if these would fit, but I put them together. They fit. I see the full picture even more closely. That's the best.
That's awesome. Well, I'm happy for you, man. It sounds like you're self-aware about where you get your satisfaction and I was going to say gratification. Is that right?
Yeah, that works. Yeah.
All right. Gratification.
Yeah.
We love making words up on this podcast. I think it's really important because some people focus on just the numbers or just certain things that people tell them to, when in fact, like for me, I'm a little bit opposite. I actually don't love the puzzle aspect to it. I love seeing the client results, but I am very progress minded. And I'm personally in a season of life where just things are so wild and busy. I'm not putting the gas pedal on my business. So my numbers are very stagnant and kind of up and down at the point, but I also know what is ahead. And I'm super excited as I launch my web design mastery program, which I'm working on. It's going to be a very different, I'm going quality over quantity as far as audience and big kind of things. But I think I say this to say it's really good to be self-aware about yourself, your business, what fires you up, what gives you energy, because at the end of the day, we're doing this to enjoy our life. Like there's nothing better than waking up on Monday mornings and being pumped to get things going. So that's my hope for everybody listening. And Jay, you're a great example of it, man. Thanks for your time today and for your transparency. Any final words, maybe a motivational minute with Jay Clouse or anything like that?
I had a reflection last night, and this might make me seem like a little bit of an absent husband. So take whatever takeaway you want from this. I went to a concert last night, Death Cab concert, bought this shirt there.
Oh, nice.
Haven't watched it yet. And there was a point in Summer Skin, great song, love that song, where Omar Zenhom quote retweeted me because he was on the podcast, and he quote retweeted it, put it out there, said, I enjoyed talking with Jay. I got the notification on my watch. I thought to myself, I need to retweet that because that's going to help this thing get more juice. It shows that I am supporting Omar as a guest of the show. It makes a good impression. I just need to do that. It's going to take me 10 seconds. Pull out my phone, do that. My wife looks at me and says, why are you on Twitter right now? And she's completely right. Like, I should have been at the concert. It's a special concert for us. But on the other hand, it's tiny decisions like that happen all the time, every day, that I've done for 6 years that have put me where I am. And I think that's the difference, like not only the endurance sport of being a creator, of like making these small decisions for a long period of time, but in small ways constantly.
That's good. That's good. Oh, well, that could dive into a whole nother topic with communication with partners and spouses about that. But I know your wife's awesome. I know she knows your business well too. And it is an interesting point. Like if I ever get my laptop out on a Friday night or something, my wife knows it must be important because we've talked about, if I do this, there's a good reason behind it. I'm not just looking at Jay's social media to be jealous. This is actually a really important thing. So love it, dude. Thanks for your time, Jay. I absolutely love seeing your journey, and you always dish out some gold nuggets. So looking forward to round 4, man.
Round 4. Woo. Yes. We're going to go the full length.
There we go.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, dude. Hey friends, it's Josh here. I just wanted to mention a couple quick things before you head out. First off, if you've been enjoying the show, please consider leaving a podcast review. I personally read all the podcast reviews. I love hearing your thoughts and feedback on the show, and it also really helps grow this podcast. You can do that easily if you go to joshhall.co/podcast review, and you can leave a review wherever you listen to the show. And then I also wanted to make sure you know that for all the extras on every one of these podcast episodes, you can go to joshhall.co/podcast. We have a post there for every episode, which includes full transcriptions, timestamps, and all the links and resources that we mentioned. So just go to joshhall.co/podcast for all the extra goodies. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the next episode.